last time I spoke after a Secretary of State was at Cereals in I think about 2004. Marianne Fisher-Boel was the EU Commissioner. She spoke, then the Secretary of State spoke, and then I was billed to speak next. I'd prepared endlessly. I had a really, really good talk. And as the Secretary of State finished, she said, "Well, I'm sorry, I must now leave you." And with that, the whole conference centre completely emptied. And I was left speaking to myself. So if you want to leave now, please do go. So this conference has billed itself as bringing together leading professionals, business entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. So I'm in front of a very august audience, and the billing went on to say that there'd be an exchange of ideas and the creation of fresh, innovative approaches never heard or seen before. Those are pretty big claims, and I'm going to do my bit, I think very, very much in line with what the two previous speakers have said, with an exchange of ideas, and I'm going to bring to the table and leave you with a checklist to help dairy farmers make the right business decisions. As you can see from the short biographical notes, I'm involved in a wide range of businesses, an export abattoir, a cheese company works quite closely with Wensleydale, Belton Cheese, an egg company, a large-scale salad and herb company, and a livestock market. Before that, I was 35 years a lawyer specializing in food and farming. At Burgess Salmon, I saw an incredible wide range of businesses growing or producing almost everything conceivable. And the bad boy in me likes to still giggle about a little scrap I had with a previous Secretary of State gaining the first license to grow cannabis in the UK, which I then actually passed on the tip to one of my clients that they should apply to grow it. They did apply to grow it, they got the license, they planted a whole load of it, they went to the Royal Show, and a SWAT team took them down in the middle of the Royal Show because the policeman had driven through their farm and found what he thought was the largest cannabis farm in Europe. So they weren't very grateful for that. To me, what distinguishes the business which can cope with change in a volatile world from one which cannot is relatively simple, at least at a high level. The well-run business will consistently make better decisions and will pull ahead of the business which muddles on, or worse still, makes no decisions at all, and just relies on Farmers for Action or the NFU to produce a magical result from time to time to keep them in business. The conclusion of my talk will be that there are no silver bullets lying around in an unused arsenal, or no magic wands to be waved. My more prosaic proposition is that the way ahead lies in business innovation and running dairy farming businesses better, with the result that dairy farmers will consistently make better decisions. I think that chimes 100% with what Alan just said after he'd finished his slides. He'd sent me his slides previously. I didn't know he was going to encapsulate my talk so conveniently for me. Being fit to succeed in a volatile world is very difficult, and it requires a big change of mindset. And again, I didn't know Alan was going to make all these references to the New Zealand rugby team, but actually I wasn't thinking about what Hens had said. I was thinking about what Johnny Wilkinson said after the match, because I don't know if you saw it, but he said that, because everyone was saying, well, what can England do now? And he said, well, you need to go away and do what I did. I went to New Zealand with England in 19, whenever it was, and we got absolutely thumped. And I saw at that point that the game had changed. The bar had been raised. I thought I was working hard. I thought I was a professional, but I hadn't actually smelt the coffee yet. I realized that there was a whole new world I had to go out there and conquer and work harder, work better, and move on. And I'm sure that that's the situation we're in British dairy farming. 3 of the other businesses I'm involved with do use currency options extensively, and 1 uses grain futures to reduce risk. I have thought about whether these types of instruments could have beneficial application for mainstream dairy farmers, but I'm struggled to recommend it. There can be no doubt about their relevance for some people, who've been mentioned before, your Dairy Crest, your Arlas, your Royal Foods, and so on. However, for myself, I struggle to see an individual farmer in all but the most exceptional cases using those instruments well. I might go further and actually suggest that for individual dairy farmers to start using them might add risk to their businesses. Now, my next point is delicate, because if you don't get the balance absolutely right, you give the wrong impression in one direction. But it's an important point, and it's just important to get it out there, because I have acted for many hundreds of dairy farmers over many years, been to numerous farmer AGMs and meetings, and I've many friends who are dairy farmers, and I think we all do in this room. And so I think we all understand that there is a lot more to dairy farming than just running a business. It isn't like the proverbial widget-making business on an industrial estate. So nothing I'm going to say belittles or undervalues the importance of understanding what it is to be involved in dairy farming. And I think we understand, all of us, that we're dealing with matters which can be of visceral or even existential importance for the individual. We're talking about lives, futures, ways of life, grandson, backwards, as Alan was. However, none of that is an excuse for not running a business well, and nor is it a reason not to constantly ask the right questions. All it does mean is that the answers you get from answering those questions have to be interpreted correctly and set in their wider context. So in short, I'm not advocating throwing the baby out with the bathwater and undervaluing the special things which make dairy farming unique. We must also remember that dairy farmers are small businesses, all of them. They're in rural locations, operating largely in isolation, striving to cope with fast-changing world, where the most important decision, which will really affect their lives, might be taken by the head of the Chinese central bank. That's why I am advocating practical innovation grounded in the realities that a dairy farmer can deal with. So what does a good small business do? Firstly, it recognizes that it is a small business and it can't be good at everything. Secondly, it goes about organizing itself appropriately so as to access services and knowledge that are available either at no cost or at affordable cost. Then, it builds the relationships, which it's now got, to use those services and knowledge it has acquired in order to make the right business decisions consistently. So pulling all of that together, let's turn to my checklist. And where better to start than the most difficult questions of all? This is the visceral, existential stuff, going to the heart of who a person is, what he or she is trying to achieve in his or her life, and how he or she relates to his or her nearest and dearest, his or her family. What could be more important than this? But how often do you really hear proper debate round a family table about these topics? The answer, truthful answer, is very occasionally indeed, and I can see some of you nodding. It just doesn't happen enough. So the challenge I'm throwing out, that's the first challenge. Sorry, touched the wrong button. The challenge is to avoid the mindset of being a victim, but instead realize that within the limits set by the likes of the Chinese central bank, there are numerous choices and numerous things farmers can do to help themselves and make the right choices. Coping with and growing in a volatile world was the task I was set to talk about. Now, that's almost certainly going to involve significant capex over the next 10 years. And that money is probably going to be coming in whole or in part from a bank. But how many dairy farmers communicate meaningfully with their bank? And I've taken the liberty of checking with some bankers and some accountants to check that my opinion on this is correct. And the answer is hardly any. It's just staggering how bad farmers are at communicating and talking with their banks. We have to change that mindset so that banks are treated as partners and co-investors, which it just so happens they are. They need to understand the business of dairy farmers, the ups and downs, and the individual challenges. And I can absolutely guarantee that bankers engage infinitely better with businesses which have addressed the issues which I'm going to cover on this checklist than those which don't. Why? Because it will be a well-informed business with self-awareness, a thought-through business plan, and a tight grip on its own performance. So when the well-managed business turns up to see the bank manager, it won't be, the opening line won't be, so my farm's worth £2.2 million. So what are you fussing about? Just lend me another £100,000. That's going nowhere. So also a word on capex and dairying, because again, dairying faces its unique issues. Collaboration and sharing infrastructure in dairying is difficult for very practical reasons. For arable farmers, it's easy, and well, relatively easy, and it works for both parties. But imagine trying to cope with TB and movement paperwork if you wanted to combine, and two farmers wanted to combine and build a new parlour. It just can't happen. The problems are almost insurmountable in practice. The arable option of sharing grain stores, having a comfortable contract farming agreement with your neighbour, simply don't exist. It's more complex. Then also dairy capex tends to be chunky. It's not small sums of money, quite simply because the things which are needed are themselves chunky, with a lot of concrete and steel. And there's only a tiny minority of dairy farmers who are fully modernised to 2015 standards. I haven't got time to cover expansion through land acquisition itself, but my colleague David Cross is here, and I hope he'll chip in something on land values and capital returns at the end. So, cost of production. I seem to have slipped on a slide. Sorry, I think it's cost of production. Now, this actually is my personal favourite subject. So actually, when I got the case study on the weekend, on Sunday night, I read it, and it was the first thing I rushed to discover. Typically, And amazingly, to my way of thinking, they don't know what their cost of production is, or if they do, they're not telling us in the case study. That does my head in. Worse still, it's so common, I can't bear it. And I know we've talked about cost of production figures a bit today. Chris covered it, Amber, Kai, Promar both here. But I worry about the cost of production figures that are talked about and that are raised in this sort of forum. I worry when they're used to negotiate with retailers on aligned contracts, because I worry that we're sending out the wrong messages. Because cost-plus contracts are fine for those who have them, your lucky aligned ones. But those who don't, managing costs is the real issue on an individual basis. And then there's the likely future milk price. You've got to have a grip of that, because that's the figure around which you're going to assemble a budget. Now, Chris has put up some brilliant analysis on all of that, and I agreed with every word he said, except possibly his cost of production figure at 28 to 30 pence. Is that really the right message to be sending out? Now, the DEFRA Farmgate price can be quite interesting, was quite interesting 10 years ago, because it was a band of 1.5 pence per litre. But now it's a band of 15 pence per litre, and so the DEFRA Farmgate milk price is, in fact, I think, probably meaningless. So here is, slightly second time round, an interesting slide. Because that is a Savills client, a real Savills client, and that is the milk price he has actually received over all those years. Now, never mind the detail at all about colours or anything, but we come and share. That figure there is 29 pence per litre. And that figure there is 24 pence per litre. So that's 8 years, so 750. If we're going to have a cost of production figure of 28 to 30, how many years is this farmer going to be making a profit? This farmer, who's a good farmer, realistically, to be consistently making a profit, he's got to have a grip, got to achieve a cost of production which is significantly lower. So I think realism is the watchword I want to try to get over here. Just going back, this is are you producing? Is the farmer producing what his supplier really wants? Now, again, Savills were asked to do a survey for a medium-sized dairy company because some of the farmers who were supplying them were unhappy with the milk price. So they went and analysed all the milk prices being paid, and what they discovered was that the variance under the same milk contract between the top 10% and the bottom 10% of supplying farmers was a whole 3p. So under exactly the same contract, the farmers who really got it were earning 3p more than the farmers who didn't get it and were just providing the wrong product. I'll just tell you a nice little story as well. I'm one of the businesses I'm involved with is an export lamb abattoir, and I was at a board meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago, and one of the farmer directors sidled up to the managing director and said, "Oh, I've sent you some nice lambs yesterday." And he said, managing director said, yes, you sent some lambs, but they weren't what we wanted. And he said, oh, they were nice lambs. And he said, yes, but they weren't what we wanted. And they were all about 3 or 4 kilograms too heavy. He'd spent a lot of time producing what he thought were nice lambs, but they just weren't what was required in the marketplace. Result, 50 pence per kilogram reduction in price. A huge amount of loss and a great deal of extra cost in adding the unwanted weight. So it's not just dairy farmers who don't get it. Then there is the dairy farmer himself. Now, every large dairy farmer that I know, without exception, employs European labour and is paying the basic wage of about £7.20. That's how it is, and presumably how it has to be to keep the cost of production down. Now, I'm sure one of the issues which will arise later is going to be whether John thinks milking his cows at £7.20 per hour is the best use of his time. And in fact, I think when you delve into it, you may find that his actual remuneration of what he's paying himself is actually going to prove to be slightly less at £6 per hour. Then, the subject of the milk purchaser. There is so much to be said about this, but the consolidation in processing over the last 20 years has been extraordinary. We're not yet on a par with the sugar industry. Alan's referred to the pig industry. I'm going to refer to the sugar industry. But we're definitely heading in the same direction. With sugar, it's simple. You can only get a contract to supply sugar if your farm's in the right location. And frankly, we are seeing signs of that already. There have been signs of that. And the evidence is there that that is coming. And there is also a huge issue, and I'm not going to dwell on it. We all know the sort of issues that arise with failing dairy companies or failed dairy companies. And there's really not enough attention, I would suggest, on the quality of the covenant on which the milk check is founded. And granting your milk purchaser extended credit, the amount of exposure you're taking on and the risk you're running, again, there needs to be very serious questions addressed if you're going to be fit to survive in a volatile marketplace. One of the more obvious points is about buying inputs, but it's still a huge issue if you're going to survive volatility. The price of hydrocarbons has tumbled, but how many farmers have obtained their share of that gain? I really haven't seen evidence of it. There are massive savings available on electricity and other fertilizers and other products. Then again, the AHDB, I mentioned that. They get a lot of bad press at the moment, I've noticed. But it's actually an amazing, wonderful, free resource. Easily accessible, up to date, and farmers have actually paid for it. But do they use it? Sadly, you know the answer. I checked last week, and less than 30% of dairy farmers are even signed up to receive, let alone read, Forage for Knowledge. Equally appallingly low are the take-ups on the daily, the weekly and the monthly updates on data for the dairy industry produced by the AHDB. That is shocking for me, and imagine the difference if you were a bank manager on being confronted with a dairy farmer who could start by explaining the state of his industry clearly and simply with the help of the information provided by the AHDB, compared with sitting down with a farmer who's in a muddle and doesn't understand where his industry is at and how he fits into it. We have to change that. Then the last thing I was going to mention really is benchmarking. Everyone talks about it, but only a tiny handful of people do it seriously. The output of a serious benchmarking group is for sharing of knowledge. How did you reduce your electricity bill by £10,000 last year? The answer is asking the right questions and signing a few pieces of paper. How did you use less water? Maybe more technical. How did you manage to spend less on dry cow treatments? Lots of small adjustments and pieces of knowledge emerging from communication, all of which are part of being fit to survive in volatility. My contribution then is to put forward this checklist to help dairy farmers and their families working with their stakeholders to make the right decisions for themselves and to do so consistently. This checklist is deceptive. Answering the questions raised properly does actually mean you have to smell the coffee. You have to see that the bar has been raised, and you have to be voting and taking actions to become the best. I'm sure it's not perfect, and there are some great brains and some great experience in this room, and the checklist can be improved. But it would be a helpful and practical tool to put out to dairy farmers to help them be in control of their own destinies rather than relying on the amazing David Handley and the tireless and dedicated NFU. And on Sunday evening, I road tested my checklist as I read the case study, and I hope you will do so as well. Thank you.